Councilor McGill sent a notice to the mayor and the clerk today requesting to participate virtually due to a medical condition that prevents her from attending in person. Is there a motion to approve Councilor McGill's attendance?
So moved.
Thank you.
Is there a second?
Second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Okay, congratulations, Sina, you're legal. And just to be clear, we should have done the same thing last time around also, when you still had a medical condition at that point, and we acknowledged that and we went ahead even though we didn't formally take the vote. So hope you're on the mend and back with us soon. Is there a motion to approve or to amend the agenda?
I move that we approve the agenda.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Councilor McGill, you're looking puzzled at us, but we can't hear you. Is there, we can't hear you. Can you hear us?
Yeah,
Okay.
Barely hear you.
I can hear y'all if you can hear me.
Yes,
We
now we
can
can
now.
hear you.
Okay.
Okay.
I was just going to say also for the record, I know I am both this time and the previous meetings, I have been at my home in the city of Charlottesville.
Yes,
Because I believe that's also supposed to be announced as to my location.
you're right. Thank you. Okay, so we have an agenda that's passed. This meeting will be divided into three main sections. First is a work session to hear and discuss presentations that do not require a council vote, followed by a closed meeting, roughly around 5:30. Then the city council business meeting, which will begin around 6:30. There will be seating available here in council chambers for up to 23 pre-registered attendees and media. Others are available to join electronically by Zoom at any time. Right now, we're on the 4 o'clock agenda, and the first item on our agenda is a report from PVCC and their update and introduction of their new president.
Yeah. Welcome.
You may have received a presentation in advance, but I'll go ahead and just kind of go PowerPointless. So anyway, I'm Jean Runyon. I am excited and honored to be the 6th president of Piedmont Virginia Community College. I joined on July 1st, and I've come from experience at 3 comprehensive community colleges, 2 in Maryland and 1 in Colorado. And Janet Morrow, a member of our college board, is joining us today. And so this is just an opportunity for me to say, hello, I'm here, and I'm looking forward to really working with all of you and being part of the community where I live and serve. And so this is Piedmont Virginia Community College's 50th anniversary. Last week, we celebrated our birthday, and it marked 50 years of having students join the college with impact and opportunities to either come to us because they want to transfer with a associate's degree to a 4-year university, to enter the workforce, or to come back and retool and retrain. And we are really proud of all of our impact, and we're looking towards the future as well. And just a couple of things. In the last 50 years, more than 250,000 students have come to Piedmont Virginia Community College, and more than 17,000 have actually earned associate's degrees or certificates. And last year alone, we had 1,061 students who earned associate degrees or certificates, and 147 of those students said that the city of Charlottesville was their home. And we're really proud of all of our partnerships with our local high schools. Our students are earning early college credit with K-Tech and also through our workforce. And so this is also an opportunity for us to look to the future, and Dr. Frank Friedman left us the opportunity to develop the college's next strategic plan, which we are doing. And for me, part of my role as college president coming in first is to really spend some time learning and listening. So I've been on discovery tours throughout our service area and meeting with individuals who have a PVCC story. And I'm asking questions about what makes PVCC unique, what are our strengths, what are our untapped opportunities, and how can we better serve our community? And so I'd like to get feedback from you and from those virtually as well. Today you received a copy of our annual report, and on the back is a QR code. And that will take you to a survey so that you can provide us with some feedback on how Piedmont Virginia Community College can continue to have excellence and impact in the years ahead. So again, I just wanted to say hello, I'm here. I would love to be part of the community where I live and serve, and I look forward to engaging with you in the near future.
Thank you very much, and welcome to Central Virginia and to Charlottesville in particular.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Runyon, I just wanted to say, all three of my kids have gone through PVCC, and I've been very grateful for the education they've received there. Myself, my own college journey a long time ago now went through a community college, and I'm just a huge believer. And so thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, the next item on our agenda, and obviously, Dr. Runyon, you're welcome to stay for as much of this as you like, or I'm sure you'll be so captivated you want to tune in from home and watch tonight. Thank you all. Next item is our Charlottesville Climate Action Plan. Who is presenting that?
Mayor Stoke, I'm going to start with some opening comments, if that's fine.
That's great. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and councilors. My name is Crystal Rittervold. I'm the Environmental Sustainability Division Manager in Public Works, and we're pleased to be here with you this afternoon. As you know, the City of Charlottesville committed to developing a Climate Action Plan, or CAP, to achieve greenhouse gas reductions of 45% by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2050. The CAP presents a strategic framework to prioritize actions to meet the 2030 goal and to position Charlottesville to achieve its 2050 goal. I will admit that we're a little out of breath from the work that's been done over the last 5 months since our last work session with you, when we provided both a programmatic overview update and preliminary content for the Climate Action Plan. Since then, we've continued to work on and deliver climate-related programs and projects, conducted various outreach, engagement, and collaboration activities with community members and organizations, as well as internal partners, and we've put together Charlottesville's first Climate Action Plan. I'm joined today, I believe, by Stacy Smalls, our Public Works Director, as well as Susan Elliott, our Climate Protection Program Manager. And in those months, we've been fortunate to bring on a new team member, Emily Irvine, who joined us last month in our recently established new position, Climate Program Specialist. Emily has already made some great contributions to our work in the short time she's been here, and she's going to be integral in implementing this plan. The 2022 Climate Action Plan has background and guidance context, presents emission reduction strategies, and key actions to be pursued and implemented over the next 5 years, including important equity considerations and progress metrics. It identifies projects, programs, policies, processes, and some key resources needed to support action in the near term. Now that we have established what we need to do, we will turn to how to get it done. This is a community climate action plan. There are clearly actions that the city can and should take the lead on, and there are actions that the community can and should take the lead on. And there are some that we can do together. Council, you directed us to bring a climate plan forward, and here we are. I want to thank everyone who has contributed to bringing this plan together, and I appreciate in advance the hard work and the effort community-wide that will be involved in delivering on it. And so with that, Susan, if you would please go ahead with our presentation, and then we'll welcome your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, everybody. We are here with our Climate Action Plan, which we have branded the efforts of Charlottesville's climate program, including the development of this plan and then what comes next, under the slogan of Charlottesville Acting on Climate Together, because it really is going to take all of us working together to make the transitions possible that we need to. So let me get my, there we go, okay. So since we were here before, we did speak a bit last time about what our approach was to developing this plan. And we took a multi-layered approach to the plan development. What that means is that we started off with Charlottesville's greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. That is what we were tasked to develop a plan to meet. We also included guidance from City Council, 2 different resolutions that were passed in 2019. The local climate action planning report that was a collaboration between the city, the county, and University of Virginia back in 2012. We looked at the comprehensive plan and the recently adopted pieces of that speak to the climate program. We looked at the community input that was received through the various stages of the CVIL Plans Together effort. We also had direct input from the community as well as staff. And then we also looked over at what is the data that our greenhouse gas inventories are telling us? Where are our emissions coming from, and where do we need to focus efforts in order to reduce those emissions? We also considered plans from peer localities, both within our local region, within our state, and across the country. And lastly, we also brought in policy guidance that we have from industry best practices, what is being researched, what's coming out and happening out in the field, as well as our Global Covenant of Mayors annual reporting requirements and the pieces of what they are going to be asking us about our plan and what it includes. In terms of our engagement, our community involvement came in a number of different shapes and sizes. It came from small group facilitated sessions. It came from working with concentrated folks focused on specific areas of topic expertise. We had large group community conversations. We had direct input via surveys. Again, we incorporated input from the housing plan and comprehensive plan update. We had a community town hall workshop and 2 different listening sessions that were focused on bringing new voices and marginalized communities into what we were looking at with our plan. In addition to this, community organizations and community members also reached out to us directly with their recommendations and positions that they were supportive of. All of this has led to the development of our plan document, and there will be more presentations, more education, engagement, and cooperation on action moving forward. In addition to what we had from the community, we also had a lot of cross-departmental staff engagement. A large number of the departments you can see there are on the operations side of the portfolio, and because those are the ones that really shape what are the fuel and energy sources that we are using within our own operations, within our own organizations running. Those are also the departments that end up putting out things into the community that shape what the choices are that our community members can then make. And so there's been a lot of different levels of engagement, a lot of different perspectives that we brought together. And we think we've been able to bring it all together really well into this plan. In terms of how our plan is structured, it is strategic. What we mean by that is we have strategies that are aimed at meeting our 2030 and 2050 greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. These strategies and actions are looking at both things that the community can do and things that the municipal government can do. This plan is a living document, meaning that we can respond to the changing environment around us as things progress, as things change, new opportunities come available. We did put accountability and oversight metrics into it in the sense that we will have annual progress updates, and then there will be a full review and update of the plan every 3 to 5 years. We also recommended that the first update comes in the next 3 years so that we can then have that update occur prior to the next comprehensive plan update. That's in response to comments that we heard from the community and also from staff about being able to have these different plans better able to speak to each other as they go forward. This plan also looks at bridging into implementation. So along with each strategy, we have identified key actions that are milestones for achievement to be completed within that 3 to 5 year timeline. These are things where we're looking at a strategy that may be stretching out to 2050, but we acknowledge that there's actions we need to be taking now so that we are positioned to then know what our next steps are and to have informed next steps on how to get there. Additionally, in the document, we have some guides for action. These are things that reflect the values and priorities of our community, and they are aimed at shaping the how we or community members and organizations go about implementation of this plan. As a bit of background, when we look at our greenhouse gas emissions, we've made a lot of progress since we first started measuring those. We are about 2/3 of the way towards achieving our 2030 goal, but we still have a long way to go, particularly when we look out to 2050 and reaching carbon neutrality. When we dig into a little bit of what's behind these emission numbers, what we see is that 95% of the emissions are actually coming from within activities in the community, and 5% is coming from our municipal operations. When we look into that 95% number, what we see is that about 2/3 of that is coming from our residential commercial buildings. And when I say commercial, that also includes nonprofits, businesses, houses of faith, anything that's more of that organizational type building structure. Another third of our emissions is coming from our transportation sector. These are the emissions that are produced by all of us just getting around town to do what we do, whether it's for work, recreation, or other daily tasks that we have to do. And then there's 5% that's coming from our waste. These emission breakdowns, this is reflected into the structure of how the plan content is organized. So we start off with a preface and introduction where we explain background about greenhouse gas emissions, what the targeted scope was for this plan, the council directive resolutions included, and then information just about what are the general type of actions that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, what are the different options available to us, and then some high-level scenarios of what does that look like to try to reach our 2030 goal. In chapters 5 through 9, we move into looking at what the strategies and key actions are. And these sections are broken out by looking at what our focus is within the community, what our focus is within our municipal operations, what is the role for the city in various facets as being a leader. And then it's starting to look at, once we have emissions out there, what are our options for drawing this down and removing emissions from the atmosphere, as well as some other items that are outside of our greenhouse gas inventory scope, but are things that are relevant to our community and or voiced by our community as values. Additionally, in each section, we talk about equity considerations. We identify sub-goals, and we also note where there are connections over to climate adaptation. One thing within our Global Covenant of Mayors commitment is we are developing both this emissions reduction plan, and in parallel, we are developing a climate adaptation plan, which our climate risk and vulnerability assessment was completed over this past year. And so those two pieces need to also be able to speak to each other and support each other. Looking at implementation of this plan and identifying supporting next steps, we have included a project and resource needs list. These are items that in the near term are restricting us from being able to take action and are things that are easily identifiable that we know need to be addressed in order to get movement. Recognizing the city has its zoning update process, we currently have a zoning alignment list in the plan. Right now, these are in general topics. Another next step for refining that is to put those categories in alignment with what the zoning approach is that's been put out so that there's a closer one-to-one match as people look across the two documents and the two processes. We also included guiding directions about principles, values, equity considerations, and priority audiences that were identified that we need to make sure we're engaging and that we're developing resources and providing that support to within our community. We speak to accountability metrics and outcomes that we are aiming to see. And then for anyone who's newer to these conversations or who maybe hasn't been as involved in some of the more technical aspects, we've provided 5 different climate action fact sheets in the document, along with an abbreviations and definitions glossary to help make that connection for people who want to dig in a little deeper or who may be unfamiliar with some of the concepts we're talking about. We also have citation links where people can click into the original, whether it's a news article or a research study, to really dig into some of the details further. So I'm now going to give you some highlights of what's in the document. In terms of starting off with focusing on our community emissions, what we see really is that about 2/3, that big green section, that's our emissions that are coming from our buildings and energy. The next section is that transportation, that blue part. And then it's followed up with where we have our waste emissions, and then wastewater and process and fugitive ones. Focusing really in on those two pieces, the green and the blue, because that's where the bulk of our emissions are. That's also where we have the bulk of opportunity to reduce our emissions as a community. The strategies that we have include focusing on increasing energy efficiency and renewable energy within our buildings. There are strategies and actions that focus on new construction as well as existing buildings. And then strategies that look at how to support and increase zero carbon and carbon neutral energy sources. 2 key focuses that were identified in looking at our buildings and energy is that we need to make sure we're developing programs and support that speak to both our single family type of properties, but also things that go up to our multifamily and our business type properties. Additionally, Charlottesville has a 60% rental rate for households, which means if we're going to make progress in terms of how we're affecting our buildings, we need to look at things that are both owner occupied, but also rentals, and really being able to engage and find solutions that work for the property owners and the tenants in those properties. When we look over at our community transportation, the strategies speak to increasing travel by walking, biking, and transit. So that's the idea of mode shifting. And the key assets around this are increasing that safety, the availability, the connectivity, the reliability, and the accessibility of those different modes for transportation. When looking over at what the vehicles are that we're using on our roads, there are strategies that speak to increasing the use of high fuel efficiency vehicles as well as electric vehicles. And when we're looking at electric vehicles, this is both the vehicles itself as well as that electric vehicle charging equipment. Going back to what I said a minute ago, that 60% of our households are renters. That means about 60% of our households can't necessarily guarantee where they are parking each night. So if they're going to be looking at electric vehicles coming out in the market and reaching cost parity within the next 5 to 6 years, what we're going to start seeing as those vehicles come on the market for new vehicles as well as used vehicles is people questioning, am I going to be able to use this vehicle and actually charge it or not? And so that's where the focus on making sure we have the right electric vehicle charging infrastructure is coming into play in this plan so that people then have that choice when they go to get a vehicle, what type they're using. And then lastly, on the transportation side, is encouraging alternative travel behaviors. So how are people choosing to travel? Are they able to daisy chain what they're doing? Are they able to maybe shift one of those types of activities that they're doing each week to something that could be less carbon-based? Connected into this idea of how we're developing our buildings and our transportation goes into what our land use patterns are. And this connects over into nature-based solutions. So particularly as we're looking at densifying more, we have to also understand and look at what we're doing with urban heat and the materials that are then retaining more heat within our urban environment. So nature-based solutions are one approach to being able to cool our urban heat, particularly putting these in areas that are around the buildings so buildings don't need to use as much energy to cool themselves, and along key transportation corridors, particularly those that are active outdoor corridors or access to transit. These techniques for nature-based solutions include tree canopy and various types of green space. And in terms of implementation, what came up was looking at that getting a more balanced distribution of green space and tree canopy across our city, looking at both how we're developing along those sites, but then also what are those priority access routes for folks, whether that's getting to their local community garden, whether it is how they are getting to school, or how they're then getting to that bus transit stop, and then what is that situation like while they're there waiting on the bus to come. Another piece that ties into success in this area is looking at funding and financing. So the strategies identified looking and reviewing at alignment of existing city incentives and what's within the city's ability to provide incentives to the community. It looks at leveraging federal, state, and utility-funded programs and then connecting our community to these programs. It also speaks to support for new funding and financing programs, 4 of which are listed on the slide as things to either support, to move forward, or to investigate further. Along with our community emissions is also the waste category. And these strategies speak to adopting a sustainable materials management approach, reducing food and organics from our waste stream, and then increasing the amount of composting and diversion of organics from the landfill of whatever remains in that waste stream. When I speak to food and organics, there are a number of things, but the large 2 ones are like food scraps that we have, as well as what our yard waste is and from landscaping on our properties. The city also has a couple of other unique roles where it can exhibit leadership within the community. One of these, which has been a topic of much discussion, is also the city as a gas utility. Charlottesville is unique from other communities that have developed climate action plans because it owns and operates a natural gas utility. This presents some interesting challenges as we're looking at what we can do to go forward. It also presents some unique opportunities as we go forward. And the gas utility is committed to being a partner in helping Charlottesville and its other local areas reach their climate emission reduction goals. Several of the things that are included in the section of the city as a gas utility include supporting energy efficiency within our community, and there are some existing programs the utility already has on this front. There's an action to review the gas main extension policy. This is a policy that is in the city code, and council can amend that if it so wishes. There's also a commitment to assessing the decarbonization of the gas utility and looking out at our 2050 goal and how to reach carbon neutrality. The gas utility has already issued an RFP to get assistance in doing a study on decarbonizing and what the options are and impacts of that. Additionally, the question around carbon offsets has come up in our community conversation. The Charlottesville Gas has committed to a multi-year contract for carbon offsets right now and participating in that program. In parallel with that, in our community conversation, there's been questions around the complexity around offsets in terms of how reliable are they, how are they verified, what does that then look like? And so there's information in this plan that speaks to both what Charlottesville Gas is currently doing with carbon offsets, but then another section in the plan that looks at carbon offsets as a whole and questions that we've heard regionally and opportunities for us to all learn together and figure out a little bit what that looks like in terms of carbon offsets for both community members, but also for the city.
Susan, could I interrupt you just a second? On this particular page where you say you want to assess decarbonization of the gas utility, we got an email late last night wondering about what possible legal questions there could be concerning decarbonization. I know you're not the lawyer here, but can you give us any insights as to what the issue might be?
So there is something in the General Assembly's legislation around choice of fuel sources. And so I think there's a couple of questions that speak to what are process options that the city and Charlottesville Gas would have to go through if it wanted to stop providing that service. And that's about all I can speak to on the specifics. I'm not well versed on all the ins and outs of it right now.
So there may be some obstacle in the state enabling legislation. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay, that gives me at least a little something to think about what our next steps might be. Fine, thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Yes, and in that legal, what the legality is and the regulations around it, that is one piece that is included in the RFP for that decarbonization study. So more information on that, both of what staff as a whole right now knows, but also go through that process and that study, it will get more refined on detail.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Let's see, so looking at some other roles of the city in terms of its leadership opportunities within the region, is also the city as a landlord. The city has a number of properties that it owns and then it leases out. And in this case, if we are asking our property owners and landlords in the city to think about their residents and what their role can be in terms of being able to help us move forward with our emission reductions, the same is true for us. What can we do within our leases? What is our relationship with those properties and being able to help those tenants both reduce their emissions, but also possibly realize energy savings on their utility bills. And then I mentioned it earlier, but the city also has its zoning update process going. And so we've identified in the plan what some items that connect between those two. Going over into our municipal emissions section, this is from our municipal operations and some highlights from that. When we look at the emissions just within our municipal operations, about 55% is coming from our buildings, about 7% is from our streetlights and traffic signals, and then 38% is from our municipal fleet and fuel use. If you think of the streetlights and traffic signals and the buildings being that buildings and energy section, you might notice this pie chart looks pretty similar to what we're seeing on the community side, where about 2/3 is coming from our buildings and energy use, and about 1/3 is coming out of our fleet and our fuel use we're getting around. Diving in on just that buildings and energy piece of it, what we've mapped out is where we started in 2011, which is our baseline for measuring our reductions to our goal in 2030, what our reductions were through 2016, and then different specific strategies for reducing emissions within our buildings and energy portfolio. What you can see is that with what we are able to identify for projects, we don't quite make it to that reduction for 2030. There are other offsite and external factors that we can pursue, but when we're looking ahead, really getting as much as we can with our on-site pieces and then starting to look at those off-site factors is going to be really important. Taking these actions and laying them out as a potential timeline for what it looks like for us to get to 2030, what we see is a layering of different actions, and as well as looking at where we can then meaningfully get them implemented, do measurement verification, continue to do building improvements, things such as the re-roofing projects that we need to do in order to then enable a next round of different projects going forward. This timeline looks at getting as many things done as we can by 2027 and 2028, so that we can then properly assess what we have left to do in order to reach our 2030 goal and start working towards 2050.
Can
In the
I ask
plan
you, while
regarding
we're on this page, what is involved in getting an on-site solar PPA?
Sure. So there's a couple of pieces. Solar PPA stands for a solar power purchase agreement, and it is a specific type of contracting structure where you can get many different solar projects under one pricing group together. As you're identifying those, there's a couple of pieces of what you're trying to maximize. Are you trying to maximize your cost savings off of your utility bills? Are you trying to maximize the amount of on-site generation? Are there other pieces in terms of community engagement or other factors like that that you want to incorporate into there? From a structural perspective, you want to be looking at what is your re-roofing schedule. So if you know you're going to be replacing a roof on a building within 5 years, that would not be an optimal one to put a big solar system on, because 5 years later, you're just going to have to pay to take it off, put the new roof on, and then add the solar back onto it. There's also considerations around the structural integrity for the building and how much additional weight it can have on the rooftop. A couple of the other factors, once you're then looking at once you've identified which buildings can support solar, you also want to look at what does that mean in terms of laying solar out on the rooftop. So if you have a lot of, for example, shading on the roof, or entry and exit points off the roof, or like HVAC rooftop units that shade a large portion of your roof, that may not be the most economical one for you to include as you're looking at where you want to put your solar. And so when you're doing a solar PPA, usually it's a batch of buildings that get looked at together. And so some of those price considerations can balance each other out. But you do want to look at that across the portfolio and across what it is that you're looking at for achieving then those outcomes of, is it cost savings, is it cost neutrality, is it maximum generation that you're aiming for?
I guess what I'm wondering is, what you've described is the physical process for, I guess, for getting solar on a roof. But is there some difficulty with, I mean, I gather that the power purchase agreement is made with Dominion.
If I could jump in real quick, I was just going to say it's basically there's a contracting piece of it and there's a financing piece of it. And so it's a question of, do we establish what we want for the program goals and issue our own request for proposal? Do we evaluate the ability to use a cooperative procurement mechanism for a program that's already being deployed by another peer jurisdiction? And then what are the financing pieces of it? So what does it take? It takes some interdisciplinary city team to commit to looking at all the steps and going through them and then pulling the trigger.
Well, and I guess part of the reason for my question was I remember a few years ago learning somewhat unexpectedly that we, even if we had wanted at that particular point in time to enter into a PPA, that apparently the window had closed, or that there were not sufficient opportunities available, or something, that there was a legal obstacle as well as simply the practical obstacle of, can we put solar panels on the roof of Greenbrier School?
Right, you're exactly right. The last time we had almost enough momentum to move forward, cap on the pilot program closed, and then that cap has been expanded with some legislation, so that's no longer the barrier.
Are we likely to, I mean, is there still a cap, but it's just less confining?
Yep, that's right.
So we would be competing with other folks in the state to get to have more PPAs.
Yeah, I mean, it's called subscribing to the program, and at the moment, that's not the barrier. So I think it is a very viable option for us to move further on.
So the constraint at this point would be figuring out how the finances would work.
and determining which procurement method we're going to use, what the financing pieces are, and I think those are two critical ones.
Is there a reason why, again, this is responsive to the email we got last night, is there a reason why we would want to be waiting 4 years before doing a second PPA?
Yes, sir. You got my message.
Yeah, I got your message. No, and I think that timeline really is for discussion purposes. Probably the biggest limiting factor on when we would do another one is when we have a roof that's ready for it.
I got
And
you.
so
Okay.
if we can, I'll be honest, Charlottesville High School is the biggest roof that is next up for re-roofing. Ideally, we would be right behind it with a solar system, whether
Okay.
cash funded or PPA. So those are the kinds of strategic planning decision-making that needs to happen. And then there's another school that needs a roof. And then there's another school that needs a roof. And so I think if we could establish a formal institutionalized cadence, we can do this. We can't snap our fingers and deploy solar on every roof overnight, because
Right.
most of the buildings in many communities where they're deploying them fast, they're putting them on new construction where the building's designed for solar. And so that would be the approach for the Buford Walker projects, right? Those buildings will be designed to hold solar, and then we need to come up afterwards with solar.
One of the other things that has come up as I've been driving around the country recently is a number of schools in particular have used their rather extensive parking lots to cover them over with solar power panels. Is that something that we have looked at or would consider?
We've looked at a very sort of desktop level at where there might be parking lots that don't have shading, where that might be an option. And so I'd say we have not excluded it, but we haven't pursued that as the first type of project we would do.
Okay. I didn't mean to interrupt and get us offline,
Those are
but
great questions.
since you had the PPA thing up there, I wanted to jump on that question. Thank you.
Yep.
And one of the other pieces when you're looking at a PPA, this goes back into what Crystal was saying about the different contracting methods, is you also need to look at, for example, a ground-mounted system or a canopy. There's different construction requirements of that can raise that cost up. And so as you're looking at across your portfolio as a whole, what your aims are, if you need it to be cost neutral, for example, or you need it to be less than what we would be paying out to our regular utility, all of those factors come into play. One of our local solar installers actually had, several years back, looked at the Charlottesville High School parking lot, and they were super excited about it until they realized that the Dominion electric lines there put little faint lines of shadow across the parking lot over the entire course of the day. That would basically, even though it's just little lines of shadow, it would significantly decrease what the panels could produce, to the point that they decided that it probably would not be cost effective or worthwhile for us to do solar panels on that parking lot. So there's a lot of detailed considerations that go in beyond just that first desktop review piece.
I would also just like to answer a question that Liz Russell asked. What we're currently talking about are on-site power purchase agreements, but we are in parallel also looking at what the opportunities for virtual PPAs would be, not so much because our city isn't high enough to get into that game, but because we don't have enough rooftop space to generate the amount of power that our city uses in its city and school buildings.
Okay.
And so then as we go looking over at the plan, looking at these different actions, the different sort of timelines, the strategies that the plan lays out for our municipal buildings and energies is looking at increasing that energy efficiency and on-site renewable energy within our both new buildings, new major retrofit and construction projects, our existing buildings, converting all streetlights and traffic signals, whether they're owned by Dominion Power, whether they're owned by the city, over to LEDs. And then looking at just the amount of electricity that our municipality uses and aiming to get that to carbon neutrality by 2030. In order for these to move forward, this is where some of those funding and resource needs have been identified. These are all projects that are capital improvement projects. And so whether we look at funding them through the CIP budget or through alternative funding structures and sources, they're CIP projects that need to have some sort of funding decisions made around them. As CIP projects, they also need some sort of project management capacity. And that right now is limited. So either that means we need to look at assessing what the different priorities are and within our existing project management capacity, or the city needs to increase the amount of capacity it has to be able to support the projects moving forward. In terms of policy and process improvements, the plan also speaks to updating our green building policy, looking at how we can capture and allocate the operational energy cost savings from these different projects so that we can then help support their funding, as well as different opportunities and needs for cross-departmental collaboration and integration into different work plans. Sorry, my Zoom controls are getting mixed up with my PowerPoint controls. Looking at our municipal transportation and fuel use side of things, looking at the plan recommends adopting a green fleet policy and management approach. This means we need funding for vehicle replacements. It also looks at the EV charging equipment. And as I noted on the previous slide, anything that we're doing on equipment installs, anything that is doing improvements on our capital projects, we need then project management support for those as well. Additionally, we would need more staff capacity for introducing and overseeing a green fleet management program. In regards specifically to our transit buses, there are different requirements that the FTA is putting on any sort of alternative fuel transition. And so Charlottesville Area Transit has an alternative fuel study underway currently. The results of this will then be used to inform where the city goes in terms of transitioning its buses off of diesel. These considerations will include looking at both what the vehicles, what those vehicle capacities are and capabilities are compared to current operations, as well as potential site improvements that would be needed to support that switch to those different vehicle types. What those investments are could also include like a horizon of what is in that time investment if we're going to do those site improvements and those investments in those vehicles. What does that mean in terms of looking out over a 2030 and 2050 timeline for what those fuels are and what sort of emissions we would be seeing from those? Additionally, captured in our municipal transportation and fuel use section are other mobile assets. This is largely our landscaping equipment or backup generators that are mobile that we move around within the city. To support improvements and emission reduction in this area, it's looking at funding and assessing what equipment replacement options there are for electric power replacement, as well as looking at operational changes that we can do, such as reduced mowing. When we look across the plan as a whole, there's a lot of things that are strategies that we're speaking to along with those key actions. So in terms of a quick summary of things we've talked about today of what does the climate action plan look like in action, here's a compiled list of some of the items we've talked about. At the top, we have things that are focused specifically on our city operations that are within our city organization, its responsibility and roles and abilities. On the bottom half, we're seeing things that are out in the community that support reductions of emissions within our community. Actions in this space can be led by the city. They can also be led by community members or by community organizations, or they could be done through a partnership between the two. But there's definitely nothing on here that is necessarily dependent on the city having to take that lead or only the city taking the lead. There are options for many people in the community to take action, and we're very excited as we go forward to also work with folks and hear what it is that they want to take ownership of or that they want to lead and move forward. And then as we look forward after tonight for next steps, we will be rolling out this plan, speaking with different advisory committees, different organizations within the community, and hearing from different community members directly as to city departments of what is in the plan, what they see that they have as priorities, how this most closely relates to their work, and then which parts do they see a role that they would like to play in helping to implement this plan. As we start to hear this more, and we're confident that this is all gelling, we'll be moving out into a document layout and design, and then initiating the comprehensive plan amendment process. One other thing to note is that this is a living document, and so this, while it will be integrated with various organizations' work plans, we will also be coming back to you all with updates at least annually before we then come about with that 3 to 5 year full review and update. So moving into discussion, we wanted to open it up for you all first in terms of comments, reactions, and thoughts, same thing we're going to be doing when we reach out to others in the community. We'd like to hear if we have your support for moving forward on this, as well as do we have support to get an opening letter from council to put into our climate action plan process.
And sorry, before we begin, Councilor McGill texted that she tried to speak during the PVCC section, and I guess her audio, they said they could hear her on the Zoom, but we still can't hear her, so just.
No?
So
Okay.
can you now?
Oh,
Now
there we
we can
go.
hear you.
Okay, now it works. Okay.
Never mind.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
While we
good.
got you, Sina, what do you have for us?
I'm good. Well, the only thing I would like to see is, once we're moving past this, I really like the presentation. It's, I had read through the whole plan. This really, I feel, kind of pinpoints and summarizes some things much better for me in a more understandable manner. And I appreciate the work that's been going into all of this. What is the plan for the community kind of comment period of this? Once you get the letter from council saying, yes, this is the direction we're happy you're going in.
Yeah, so in terms of community comments, we've already started getting some things in from folks since we announced last week that the document was out on the website. It is a living document, and so I think it somewhat depends on what it is that we're hearing back from folks. We do have our ongoing climate program, and so depending on what the comments are, it may be things that we can roll into our activities in terms of implementing the plan, in terms of what we're doing with our program activities over this year before we then get to that one-year progress update piece. If it's something substantial that we've just completely missed, that would warrant us trying to do an update prior to that. So it kind of depends on what the feedback is that we end up hearing from folks.
And then the second piece, I noticed there was a lot of comments in the chat about how can we address other opportunities besides CIP. I know that Mr. Sanders has been working on, there's been a grant. We've had a position for the city for a grant writer, which we are trying to fill. And this would fall under, in my understanding, in that area as well, because the Build Back Better plan in particular has quite a bit of access. We are very aware of that. I know Mr. Sanders and Mr. Rogers and Ms. Marshall have been working very hard to try to bring someone in to only focus on the grant piece. But as we see across the city and across the nation right now, we are having difficulty hiring people.
So one example in terms of a funding piece, and this I think speaks to one of the other comments that was in the chat, what we were speaking about earlier, solar power purchase agreement. That is one type of project, is one type of example. So I don't want to say this is applicable to every single type of action we may go forward with. But many of those, you can structure it so that the city does not have to put any upfront money down. What it is that someone else provides the financing for the panel, and then the contract is structured in advance that we know how much we would be paying per kilowatt hour of energy that those panels are generating for us. And this goes back to what we're talking about, what is the cost to actually then construct and install those panels onto the building. For many of these contracts, that cost that we would be paying per kilowatt hour can be equal or less than what we would be paying to our electric utility each year. And so the question becomes not so much what is that upfront amount of money that we need to contribute to the project. It becomes a question of our internal budgeting, that when we're looking at what budget lines those cost savings are existing on across many, many different budget cost centers, are we able to capture those and consolidate them in a way that we can then pay for that solar PPA for the length of its contract each year. So it's more of a shifting where the money is coming from on the operational side, rather than needing to do a capital improvement investment. That said, all the other things that tie into capital improvements on how that flows into project manager work time and capacity, where that fits in terms of priorities of other capital projects. All of those pieces are still at play. It's just shifting that funding and contracting mechanism to something that doesn't need the CIP dollars associated with it. One of the other projects that we currently have the technical audits for is the Energy Savings Performance Contract, also referred to as an ESPC. That is another structure, a funding structure that the city is pursuing and currently in conversations around. What does that look like in terms of funding the improvements that those technical audits are identifying that we would then need to move forward with?
Councilor McGill, you got any other questions for us?
I'm good for now.
Okay. Just want to make sure I didn't forget you this time around. Councilor Payne, how about you down at that end?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this we discussed the other week, but I guess some of them again. What can we do to have a process, you think, in terms of prioritizing for this upcoming budget cycle? Some of the investments we can begin to make. Is there an effort in terms of what we should prioritize, or break it down by the amount of money needed for that investment, just so we can start to begin to implement it this cycle?
Councilor Payne, that was actually, I think, what really expedited getting this plan in front of you all, so that it would be right in front of the CIP and the operating budget cycles. There will be some CIP requests in, and I think part of that will spur the conversation of, does it get funded through the CIP? Are there some other financing alternatives? This is new territory for the city, right? And so while I think we have a pretty awesome team, we need a lot of other team members to really complete the process of figuring out how we make this happen. We know just enough about all the financing to be a little bit harmful to ourselves, but really these are big city leadership decisions, and so we need some resources brought to the discussion about who and how and what. So yes, there will be some CIP requests. I expect there may be some operational budget requests. Some of this, again, needs to be sequencing, right? Perfect example is you need to have a robust, aggressive in the best way, roof replacement program in order to put solar out there. So one doesn't come without the other. And so that's a sequencing decision. Clearly, there are decisions in the transportation transformation space that may not happen this fiscal year, but some of those studies and some of those evaluations and some of those resources, those are the steps we have to do now. And it could be that the big investments are, maybe 5 years on the horizon, or maybe over a period of a decade, as these things, again, they don't get transformed overnight. I think those are the studies that are happening. But to Susan's point, the city has been involved in climate work for over a decade now, and we have made some progressive policies, commitments, cities the first of many XYZs. Now we have a plan, but really the next space we need to work in is action, and the action is going to take resource commitments.
Yeah, and that's all very helpful, and that to me is the biggest thing I've just continued to think through, is because this really involves almost every single department in the city. If you think about the whole plan, how do we on council figure out how we begin to take that action in a strategic way? Because I don't think we're heading in this direction, but my fear is it's such a big plan with so much in it that it could almost be easy for council to not figure out how we begin to implement it just because it's so much, if that makes any sense. Because it's kind of like, as you said, none of this is going to happen overnight. So how do we pick in our CIP, what we begin with? A smaller thing is, I think the Tree Commission had made a recommendation about a tree ordinance, I believe, as part of our zoning code to try to stop the reduction in tree canopy that we've been seeing. That hasn't come up so far in our zoning rewrite process, but I'm wondering if that's one area where there could be overlap on the tree canopy related parts of our climate action plan and getting that included in our zoning rewrite while that's going on.
Yeah, There is a relationship there. And in the section on nature-based solutions, we do set a green space goal, including tree canopy. Green space commitments is also one of the things our Global Covenant of Mayor's Commitment asks us about when we do our annual reporting. And so if there is any move towards adopting a tree canopy goal, that would interrelate to that space.
The mayor touched on this a little bit, but when it comes to the natural gas utility, what is the thought about, not only doing those studies about future connections, decarbonization of it, but recognizing that it's a municipally owned utility, is there a way to diversify the work that it's doing? We got an email last night that referenced if the natural gas utility could get involved in selling community solar as part of its work, or taking advantage of some of the programs in the Inflation Reduction Act, which could maybe help diversify the work that it's doing to not only include natural gas, but community solar and other electrification. Is that something that seems feasible or worth more explicitly including?
Well, I would respond to that. The word decarbonization study is kind of wonky, but if you look at the scope for that work, it requests that the consultant, in fact, take a look at these various types of programming, whether it's expanding the energy efficiency work that they currently do or exploring some of these other suggestions. I think at the time that went out, the bipartisan infrastructure law wasn't passed yet, so the opportunities that come with that aren't listed out, but it's not, I don't think it's exclusive of some of these ideas that can be recommended for consideration in this process. So I would suggest that I'm happy to forward recommendations to the gas utility. The public can, whatever comments you've received can be passed along. I know I was copied on the set that you're referencing now, so I can pass those along so that they can be aware of the types of questions.
Okay. And
And I'd say one other, sorry, excuse me.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say also in the section of the plan where we talk about carbon offsets, looking at it as a broader topic of just carbon offset considerations across the whole, we do have a little bit of a discussion on how to choose between making investments locally that reduce emissions, such as improving the energy efficiency in buildings where it's a one-time installment that then stays in perpetuity, versus different types of ways of diversifying your emission reductions, but you might have to continue issuing purchases for those year in, year out. And so without looking at the specific programs that were being put forward in that email, I think there are some other considerations of what's that priority order of if the city is going to be investing funding, where does it make sense that we can maximize the amount of co-benefits that we're getting from where those dollars are going to then really maximize that value within our community.
Two final things. One, Councilor McGill touched on this a little as well, but the Inflation Reduction Act includes a number of programs related to municipal utilities and climate more broadly. Do you feel like you're currently positioned to be able to take advantage of those programs and be competitive in applying for and implementing them? Or is that an area where in this budget cycle, City Council really needs to prioritize investing more in the operations and implementation side?
I think the answer would be if we were successful with multiple grant applications, we don't have the human capital to deliver on them.
Okay. No, that's very helpful.
Which has actually been true for a couple of years, but we only acknowledged it very recently.
Right. It's very helpful. And then the final question is, again, Councilor McGill touched on this a little as well, but we've heard from a lot of community organizations that C3, Southern Environmental Law Center, who wanted to be able to give feedback. I think you addressed it in saying that this is a living document. This is not like a cut and dry final draft. But to answer their concern, what is the best way for them to be providing feedback in a way that could be incorporated into the plan?
Well, you mentioned C3, and they've worked with a handful of other community organizations and provided input to us over the last couple of weeks for that. They and anyone else can continue to do so, whether they have our direct email addresses, they're welcome to use that. For anyone else in the community who doesn't have that, if you go to charlottesville.gov/climate, there is a link to a contact form that people can contact us via for that. We will also, in addition to doing outreach to different of the commissions and advisory groups within the city as an organization, we will be doing different outreach to the community. And so those are opportunities as well if they want to participate in more of a community forum type of a setup.
And Commissioner Sala Yates just put in the chat, can we lean on the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission for any grant writing for this work? Just note that. But yeah, that's all I have, and I just do want to acknowledge, I think this is an enormous step forward, and I think this really does include a lot of the stuff the community's been talking about, and it's great that, this is lined up before our upcoming budget cycle. So I really think a lot of great work has gone into this, and I do think, as you said, it's a living document. This is never the kind of issue where we'll have everything, but I do think that there really is a substantial amount in there that, already what's in it, will take the city a whole lot of money and resources to implement, but we need to, and we need to figure out how we're going to do that on city council's end. But thank you.
Thank you. Brian?
Yeah, I agree with what Councilor Payne had to say. I think it's an excellent document. I appreciate all of the hard work that went into it. Looking, where we were 6 months ago versus what I see now is it's a really dramatic and substantial amount of work. I did have a couple of questions. So on page 88 of the document, I really appreciate this. It basically, the top of the page identified projects and needed resources. It looks like a lot of the things that, there's at least a list here of things we could fund this year. And especially, I think you brought up the point about not having enough project management capacity or other staffing. Those things are there, and I hope when the city manager brings us a budget, we'll see those lined out. Other pieces here about vehicles and equipment. So I appreciate this. I realize this is only part of the story of what we'll need to do, but it's good to have something that's like, okay, this is the next thing. Couple of other questions. So the state level VECA, that commits Dominion to be fully, can you tell me what the VECA does again? It commits Dominion to be on completely renewables by a certain point?
It's actually a commitment by the state for the Commonwealth, so it's not targeting a specific utility, but there aren't that many utilities in Virginia, so you can just by extension. When that announcement was made, Dominion also made some pretty aggressive announcement about some power generation goals as well. So the point being, like we said, there are things the community can do and there's things that the city can do. There are a lot of things that are happening outside of the city that influence our climate, our emissions. And much of that is in the grid transformation space.
And do you feel like that is heading in a positive direction?
It is not heading in a negative direction.
Okay, all right, that's good to hear.
I guess that's progress. I don't know.
Yeah.
It depends on the day.
Yeah, and I guess the last thing that I had was it's very clear the distinction between municipal and the rest of the community, and doing our 5 or 10% of the total is obviously very important, and that's what the resources that hopefully we can provide you will go towards. And I know that you laid out in the document various things that the community will need to do, including the piece about working with landlords as well as renters and how that works out. And maybe if I when I go back and reread the report, maybe this will be clearer to me. But are we going to have like an office or a liaison or someone that will kind of be a broker or figure out ways to help the larger community in terms of enabling these things to happen? Or is it kind of like we've laid out what the plan is and we're hoping partners kind of join us? I know we need partners to pull this off, but is there someone on the city side that's going to be, sort of,
A liaison.
yeah, pushing this on? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's some of both. There are a lot of departments that interact with the public and would have an opportunity to communicate or connect with different folks on different actions. Our climate program specialist, Emily, who just joined us, a large part of that position is intended to help with implementation, and critical initial steps of implementation are going to be education, communication, the liaising work. We are also rapidly recognizing that Emily by herself can't do all of the things that are in here. So we're also going to have to do some prioritizing of, what are the best things to get started with. Now that we have goal one was to get a document over this line, right? And if we're all in agreement, then the next step is how do we do this, and what do we start with, and what are the things that make sense to push this? Virginia is still fairly limited in the tools we have to require things. And so a lot of it is incentivizing, explaining, educating. And I think that's where, the development community can come up with some ideas. The Planning Commission can certainly come up with some ideas. We're all going to have to be creative about how we get this done.
Right. Yeah, I guess is there sort of a council of really smart people like yourselves that meet on a regular basis to talk about this for the entire community? I know there are a bunch of different groups out there, but is there, I'm assuming that you all are at various tables, metaphorically speaking, and, pushing, or will be now that this document is approved, pushing forward, like this is what the city is saying we need to do. These are the goals that we're saying we need to have met if we're going to get to where we need to be. Are you all on board? What are you all doing to help?
Yeah, so I think part of that is what Susan was referencing with this rollout, is to get some of that initial sense of, are there other entities, players, partners who will take ownership of some of these things? Or do we come back from that and realize that there's a lot more work that needs to be done in that engagement space?
Right. Yeah,
and
it's
I would
different.
also suggest that we not go where we love to go down the rabbit hole of how to get all these things done.
Yeah.
But I think that's another conversation. And so right now we want to be able to talk about what we need to do so that we can then organize ourselves. As one of our team members said, do we get to huddle for a month after this and really work on the details?
Yeah.
And then the answer was no. We get to keep firing along.
Yeah, one last thing. I know I've talked probably too much, but the difference with, I'm at the university, and the difference between the university putting a plan like this together and the city putting a plan like this together is the university can basically say for every building that's there, you will do X, Y, and Z, and then we'll roll it into funding for projects, and then you get the Board of Visitors providing clear direction, and the city's obviously in a very different space. And so you're right. I think the engagement part is going to be a lot of, but fortunately you have Ms. Irvine there to help you. She'll do great.
Vice Mayor Wade?
Yes, thank you. Again, thank you all so much for this report. I think it's excellent. I think Brian can concur when we were out campaigning that this is one of the top topics that we heard about from the community. What is the status of it? Where is Charlottesville with it? So it is awesome to get this plan, and I like the fact that it's dynamic. And Brian, your point as far as how we can help get the word out. I know that some of the groups that everyone mentioned, the Southern Environmental Law Center, C3, that I know that, with someone who's worked with nonprofits in the community, that they're willing allies to help with this, particularly something like this. So I haven't talked with them, but I'm sure that they would love to help to do whatever we can. So I know we're short on time. I'm just going to kind of summarize some of my comments as far as the approval of the plan or the next steps. It looks like it's going to definitely take place before we do the zoning ordinance, and so we just have to make sure. I just hate to have something in either report that conflicts with the other, and I think that that could easily happen, not knowing, because we're going to get so focused on one or the other. But I'm glad that both plans are going to be dynamic, that we can change them as we need to. I think that's fine, and we need to be able to move that forward. Working with being on the school board, for many years, I'm glad that we're working with the schools. I know some of the buildings are really old and they may not have the infrastructure for them, but we have taken care of the buildings, and I think that we could be in a good position to do that. It was kind of ironic that you were saying that the parking lot may not be a good location because of Dominion power lines, the poles and things. I thought that was pretty ironic that that was said. But it really comes down to, we could do everything we can. I think it's only said it's like 5%. I think that we really need to support organizations like AHIP and LEAP and things like that, because it's our homes that we're in. I think that we can have the biggest impact, and we can set policy for new buildings that we want to see as make them as strong as possible. But for the individual homes to winterize them, I think that so much energy is lost there, and we're going to produce more to keep them warm. And if we could just have an impact there, I just think that our efforts will go a long way. But I understand what we can control. And as far as new buildings, I know that Friendship Court, they're going to have solar panels on their new buildings. I think that's awesome. Those are the type of things that we need to do. I know that C3 and others will be reaching out to you with comments as well on this. I know that they're happy that this is done. I did have one question, and it may have been said, but the presentation was kind of muffled a little bit. But what is the Virginia Green Bank? That was in one of the slides. It's one little bullet out of a lot of them. Do you recall what that is?
You're muted, Susan.
Sorry, can you hear me?
There you go.
Yeah.
Got me now? Okay, sorry about that. So a green bank is a financial structure that Connecticut is the one that I know the best, where it is funding specifically programmed at meeting energy efficiency and renewable energy goals across the state. And so it's money is loaned out for those projects. It goes through, similar with any other sort of financing process, assurances to mitigate risk, to ensure that those funds can be returned. And then those funds are available for other energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. Mm-hmm. One of the things that Connecticut has done is, in addition to looking at its financing structures to make sure that that risk mitigation, that the money is going to come back, that it's a reliable investment, because it is on energy efficiency and renewable energy, they're also looking at what are those environmental and economic benefits that are coming from those projects, both to the household, but also in terms of emission reductions. And then they are able to also screen across the demographics of the state to look at who are actually receiving these different loan products and these projects, to make sure it's also aligning with public policy goals. So in Virginia, the General Assembly has authorized the state to create a green bank, but they have not authorized any funding for it. And so the state is in this kind of it's not backwards progress. It's a step forward, but it's not currently actionable because there's no funding for it. And so one of the key actions in our plan is to support the state getting funding for that green bank program.
Okay. So just to wrap up, I think that what I'm hearing, just in general, overall, is that we really have a capacity issue as far as staffing to do a lot. So that is something we either have to bring in temp staff or hire new people. I know we have some budgeted, but that is something because if we want to do, we don't want to tap out staff, and we want it to be done so that it's long term. And so that is something we have to take into consideration as we apply and things like that. And the last one is the next step as far as the comment period. Just want to make it clear. It's like, when is the last date you want to get input from the community, from those you listed several organizations or groups that you're going to be reached out to. I think that at least 3 or 4 weeks or so, would be ideal on a big project like this. But so that's it. I'm supportive of this. It's just, thank you.
So I have a couple of questions. The last 2 pages of your presentation, I don't think duplicate anything that is in the report that we received. It was a list of climate action plan in action things that you were suggesting. And maybe it was just that it was different formatting, and I was looking for something with the same formatting, didn't see it. I thought that the next to the last page with that list of things that I interpreted as being a list of things that we basically could and should be starting with. And if that's what your intent was, that's certainly the intent that I took away from it. I love that. I hope we can get, first of all, can we get a copy of that list presented that way, because I thought it was very effective. Second, that seems to me to be the basis for any statement that we would make going forward about what we think the city as a whole should be doing. I mean, if that's either that or that list, or a few things from that list, and maybe a few other things that might come to mind. But that, to me, as I looked at the initial draft of the report that we got, my thought was, this is very comprehensive, but it doesn't tell me what to do tomorrow. And I want to know what, I need you all to tell me what to do tomorrow or next month or whatever. And that was the place that I saw the list, and I thought that was excellent. I will also say I really, really, really appreciate the fact that we're receiving this in October. I've only been on council now for 3 budget sessions or 3 budget preparations, and every time it's been enormously frustrating that somebody comes out with a grand and glorious plan in March. We have no ability to process a plan in March. We may be able to process it now in October, but we can't in March. And so I really appreciate the fact that we're getting this in time to think about it before it has to go into the comprehensive plan, before it has to go into the CIP, and we can begin to make some trade-offs and do some deciding before we get there. I didn't notice whether there was anything in here that talked about how often we would sort of update the greenhouse gas inventory. Is that part of what was in there someplace and I just missed it?
So the commitment to updating our greenhouse gas inventory is not spoken to specifically within the plan, because that's part of our ongoing commitment to the Global Covenant of Mayors. So we actually do update that every year. We are required to do it at least every 2 years.
Okay, because I remember, and it may have been 2 years ago, when I asked about it, I was told, oh, we don't do it that frequently. So anyway, I'm glad that for whatever reason that it's going to be done more frequently. I wonder if you could comment. I had been told, and I have been telling people since as though it was gospel truth, and I hope it's true, that most of the reduction that we have actually gotten to claim has been because Dominion Power has been changing its carbon mix in how they produce power. And so we get to claim significant savings in power, in carbon expenditures, largely because Dominion is now moving to better means of preparing power. Is that a fair statement, or am I going for a headline rather than substance?
So the changes that Dominion makes in terms of the electricity it's supplying us, that is definitely a big influencing factor. Every time they make their fuel sources more decarbonized, less carbon intensive, that means every single kilowatt hour that we're using in the city, without anybody here doing anything differently, we're reducing our emissions. So there's definitely a big piece of that. That is also connected into the Virginia Clean Economy Act that was spoken about earlier. And on that slide, the teal, kind of light blue municipal options, that's one of those off-site factors that comes into play with that. That said, we have had a variety of different things in terms of emission reductions that have been happening within our locality. Some of the things that makes it hard to see that in the data is that if we are increasing our growth, so like let's think about the number of additional computers and devices and everything that we're using in our homes now, even if we're decreasing energy use in some areas, if we're increasing it in others, that starts to come through in our data as though it's neutral. Similarly, if you think about increased housing developments that we've had, those new housing units are bringing on more energy demand. And so other housing units that we've made more energy efficient, in the data, that's all starting to look neutral. And that's a level of detail within the data that it's opaque to us. We get a big aggregate number of what the energy usage is within our building. We can't tell you which type of building it is or what area of the city that energy is being used or not used in. And so that's one of the places where we know there's energy efficiency work being done by organizations within our community. We've supported that. We've helped fund some of it. But we can't necessarily see it in that aggregate data because there's other factors that are coming into play that are mixing that up and hiding it.
I mean, the reason I make the point is simply that I want us not to be too self-congratulatory about the fact that we have achieved reductions in our carbon footprint in the last 10 years or so, because it has not really been because of a lot that we've done. There's a lot more that we need to be doing. And if we start thinking, oh, well, we were able to accomplish two-thirds of our goal without even breaking a sweat, we're going to get complacent. I had two other very quick points. First is relating to the greenhouse gas inventory. Is there any way that you calculate or take into account things like the new construction techniques at the Apex Energy building? Or do we factor into the greenhouse gas inventory the carbon consumption of the construction process?
No, that's not one of the things. We're looking at not those upstream pieces are not part of what we're able to calculate.
Okay, so if it doesn't result in gasoline being consumed in Charlottesville, or diesel fuel consumed in Charlottesville, or electric power being consumed in Charlottesville, I'm grossly oversimplifying. We're not going to see it in the greenhouse gas inventory.
Right. We're not going to see it in the bean counting, but we're going to see it in the actual, those are items, I think they're later in the report that talk about other strategies that we don't have the refined accounting ability for, but they still are relevant to climate action.
Yeah. And the last thing I will say is, when I campaigned 3.5 years ago, I went around the city saying, we need LED streetlights. And people said, you can't do that. Dominion Power will never agree to it. And
but you can.
I'm glad that we can, and I hope we will. Those are my only comments. I do think, as I said before, I'm very much encouraged that we have a list of things we can get started with. And I know that at the 4 o'clock meetings, we don't make decisions and take votes on things, but I suppose one thing we can do is to say to the city managers, hey, before, either maybe it would be reasonable to say the first meeting in November, can we have some way of moving forward with this, that if we need to have a letter, if we need to have a resolution, something like that, that's fine. If we need to come up with our own little list of things, that's fine, but let's figure out what our next step is going to be.
Okay.
Okay. So it's not a public hearing, but anyway. So is there anything else on our agenda for right now? I'm happy to talk to you. You can tell me afterwards. If not, we have to go into closed session and take a recess.
Yeah,
and
I have something here to read.
Yep.
Okay. Pursuant to Section 2.2-3712 of the Virginia Code, I hereby move that the City Council close this open meeting and convene within a closed meeting as authorized by Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711 A, A7, and A8 for consultation with legal counsel and briefing by staff pertaining to pending litigation, federal court case number 3:22-CV-35, Western District of Virginia, where consultation or briefing in open meeting would adversely affect the negotiating or litigating posture of the city and various city officials, and consultation with legal counsel regarding proposed amendments for use, access, management, construction, improvement, or maintenance of land and facilities within Penn Park and McIntyre Park.
The proposed agreements for those
What did I say?
amendments.
Agreements, sorry.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
So this is, we can just do by voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion passes. Council will now be in closed session. We will return to a different Zoom link for the 6:30 meeting. So if there are folks out there who are watching who want to tune in at 6:30, it's going to be a different link. See you all in an hour.